This is the mid-2012 Unibody 15-inch MacBook Pro, and it has long been regarded one of the best, if not the best MacBook Pro ever made. But this thing is coming up on 8 years old, so what I want to find out is the 2012 still the king in 2020? Regardless of what Mac you're using, Total AV has got you covered with their antivirus suite that protects against malware and traditional viruses, as well as phishing scams that are becoming a lot more common. Check out the link in the description below to get Total AV for just $19.99 annually. So I want to start this video by talking about why this was long considered the best MacBook Pro ever made. And quite simply, for a lot of people, it's one word: upgradability. That was it. That's what this thing had to offer. This was the last unibody MacBook Pro before the Retina generation took over. And it's actually kind of interesting. This computer launched at the exact same time as the Retina MacBook Pro over the summer of 2012. I hear a lot of people saying that the Unibody came out first and then the Retina succeeded it later that year. That's not true. These two launched at exactly the same time, and in fact, they have pretty much the same hardware. Obviously, the Retina has a different design, but they have the same processors, the same graphics, the same RAM. It's very, very similar. This is something Apple used to love doing. They don't do it as much anymore, but they used to introduce a new product and just kind of put it on top. So this guy started at $17.99, but the original Retina 8 years ago started at $21.99. So for at least a little while, you had a choice between the Unibody MacBook Pro and the Retina MacBook Pro with the same specs, but different designs, different architectures. And a lot of people picked the Unibody MacBook Pros because they were, on average, about $400 less expensive for pretty much the same performance, and you could actually upgrade them. So this has an upgradable SATA hard drive. You can also upgrade the RAM. You can even remove the DVD drive and put a second hard drive in it. So the specs of my machine, this one is pretty loaded out. This has the upgraded 2.6 GHz Core i7 processor, 16 GB of RAM, the 1 GB GT650M graphics, and I've upgraded mine with a 1 TB solid state drive. So this is pretty much as good as it gets for these Unibody MacBook Pros. Obviously, you could theoretically put whatever size SSD and then add a hard drive, but that doesn't really matter. That doesn't affect performance a whole lot. And I know what you're thinking, but no, you can't put in another SSD and RAID 0 them. Unfortunately, macOS doesn't allow you to boot off of a RAID drive. I don't know why. So before we break down the overall value, why don't we run through some benchmarks to see how this thing performs? As far as the CPU goes, it's really not that far off of much newer Retinas. If we compare it to, say, a mid-2015, which is often people's second favorite MacBook of all time, you'll notice that they're pretty close. Now, largely that's because Intel, frankly, didn't have a lot of competition at that time. So the CPUs, at least mobile CPUs, quad-core i7s, are all going to perform pretty close to each other from that time period, so not a huge upgrade there. The graphics are definitely the area where this shows its age. So I ran Unigine Heaven on this MacBook Pro, and what I'm gonna do is put a poll up in the top of the screen, and I want you to click on it and vote for which device you think had the exact same score as this MacBook Pro. Not close, they had the exact same score. Okay, so you should have voted by now, and the answer is the 2020 base model MacBook Air. They both scored 179. So if that gives you some idea of the context we're looking at here, the CPUs are no doubt going to be much more powerful than a 2020 MacBook Air, than that 7-watt CPU, a dual-core i3. This is definitely going to be better than that. But in terms of graphics, these things are old. It's 8 years old. There's no getting around that. So before we break down the value of this computer, let's talk about the usability of this computer, because, well, it might be an 8-year-old device. It certainly doesn't look that outdated. And sure, okay, it's a little bit thick, it's a little bit heavy, but overall, I wouldn't call this thing outdated. If you were to take certain, like PC laptops from 2012 and go out to a coffee shop with them, you'd probably get some sidelong glances of people like, what the heck is that old beast? That really wouldn't be the case here. I don't think most people would look twice at this computer. It looks like pretty much any other MacBook, and to the untrained eye, it definitely doesn't look old. It doesn't feel old. It still feels like a high quality device. But by and large, the design of this computer has held up extremely well, considering that this is pretty much a 12-year-old laptop design. It's kind of crazy. The keyboard on this thing is spectacular. There's no other word for it. This is the original chiclet keyboard that kind of put Apple on the map as making great keyboards until they took themselves off the map when they started making butterflies. And in fact, why don't we do a walkthrough, the history of all the major Apple keyboards from Unibody, Retina, Butterfly to Magic. So personally, I think the current Magic keyboard is the best of all of those. I think it blends the tactility, the clickiness of the Butterfly keyboard with much better key travel and reliability of these older keyboards. That's just my 2 cents. A lot of people really prefer the Retinas and these Unibodies even over the Magic keyboard. It's personal preference, but regardless, this is definitely better than a Butterfly keyboard to type on. So the other important input, the trackpad, is also fantastic. That's where a lot of older laptops, even if you're talking like 2015, 2016 laptops, a lot of them fall short on the trackpad. Windows laptops are getting a lot better these days. They used to have some of the worst trackpads, and I was always using a mouse because they were so bad. This is a fantastic trackpad. It's pretty much the same trackpad that you'll find on Retinas until they introduced the Force Touch trackpad, but it's fantastic. It's got all the multi-touch gestures, all of the features in macOS that you're gonna get. Great trackpad. You're also gonna get a lot of I/O, and granted, some of it is dated. FireWire, I don't know anyone who uses FireWire anymore. Some people do, and they've got it here. But by and large, the ports are great. I love MagSafe. It's a great connector. USB-C is great, don't get me wrong, but MagSafe, you got 2 USB ports, you've got headphone, microphone, separate jacks, you've got an SD card slot. This has some great I/O on it. Now, the one area where I think this really falls flat is the display. I've talked about this before when talking about Unibody MacBook Pros, and you can actually get around this somewhat if you go for the anti-glare display, which has a higher 1680 by 1050 resolution, but this is a 15-inch panel, 1440 by 900, and it's not good. I mean, the thing looks pretty chunky. It's usable, it's passable, and like I said, the higher resolution version is definitely a lot better, but yikes, it's not great. It's not very color accurate. The viewing angles aren't great. For content creation, it's definitely not as good as a Retina. However, I can't talk about Retina without mentioning one very important thing. If you're cross-shopping between a mid-2012 Unibody and a mid-2012 Retina, buy the Unibody. Regardless of what you want to use it for, regardless of the conclusions of this video, I would advise you, if you can, to stay away from a Retina MacBook Pro with the GT650M graphics. They have an issue with their voltage controller IC on the logic board. The soldering is terrible, it falls apart, the graphics fail, it's annoying. It's fixable, but just don't bother. Go for one of these or buy a newer Retina. Straight up. Now I'd like to tie this back around to talk about value. So here's the thing about this MacBook. It's limited. You cannot upgrade the CPU, you can't upgrade the GPU, there's no getting around that. However, just because it's limited in terms of horsepower doesn't mean it's limited in terms of functionality, because this is officially supported under macOS Catalina. The graphics are Metal supported, so you're going to get a full macOS experience. Now, I know a lot of people, when I say that an 8-year-old MacBook is supported and talk about that like it's impressive, will point at Windows and say, you can put Windows on like a Core 2 Duo, really old machines. But it's not quite the same comparison here, because when you're talking about macOS support, you're not just talking about putting macOS on a computer. There's a whole feature set that's associated with that: iCloud, all of the Apple applications, multi-touch gestures, metal support, AirDrop, handoff, iMessage. There's a whole feature set that is accompanied with support. And while you can run macOS on certain older devices, you can run macOS with the Catalina patch, or you can run it on really old, like 2008, 2009 Macs. But this is really a more fully featured experience. It's less buggy because it's officially supported. And granted, this is the end of support for this. I doubt that this is going to get updated for macOS 10.16. That's probably not going to happen. But the point is, you're still going to get a full macOS experience, even though it's old, even though it's limited. So I think that there's still a lot of value in these MacBooks, especially if you can find one for cheap and upgrade it reasonably. So when it comes to extracting the most amount of value from one of these, I would say upgrade it, but upgrade it modestly. So I've put in a 1TB SSD. That's probably a little bit overkill because you don't want to be putting hundreds of dollars in upgrades into this thing, because at that point, you might as well buy a newer MacBook. If you're gonna spend $400 on a base model, put in $100 for an SSD, put in $50 for RAM, you're already at $550. And sure, you're gonna get a nice machine for that amount of money. However, you're getting pretty close to late 2013 Retina MacBook Pro at that territory, and you're gonna get newer processors, you're gonna get faster flash storage, and you're gonna get better graphics and a much, much better display. However, if you can find one of these for cheap, or that's upgraded already for cheap, these are still excellent machines. Even though they're not gonna be supported officially for a whole lot longer, you can get a lot of use out of these older unibody MacBooks. And by these, I mean the 2012s. Don't buy a 2011, those are terrible. The graphics will fail and you'll die. So the ultimate question, is the unibody 2012 15-inch MacBook Pro still the king? No. It's an old computer. It's got its limitations. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't buy one. This is still a fantastic computer, and if you can find one at a good price, you'll be very happy. So that's gonna do it for this video. I hope you guys have enjoyed. As usual, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at LukeMiani, and please consider checking out my subreddit, which is linked in the description below. And with that, I will see you all in the next video.